Stop trying to stop thinking. I know that's the opposite of what every meditation app, self-help guru, and wellness influencer has told you. They've convinced you that the solution to overthinking is to think less, to quiet your mind, to find some mystical state of mental silence. But what if I told you they've got it completely backwards? What if the reason you can't stop overthinking isn't because you think too much, but because you think wrong? Right now, your mind is probably doing what it always does. It's spinning, analyzing this moment, wondering if this video will actually help, thinking about that conversation from yesterday that you keep replaying, worrying about tomorrow's meeting, planning next weekend while simultaneously regretting last weekend. Your brain is like a computer with 47 browser tabs open, all running at the same time, draining your battery, slowing down your system, making everything harder than it needs to be. And you've been told the solution is to close all the tabs, to meditate the thoughts away, to think less. But here's what neuroscience is revealing, what ancient philosophers knew, and what the most brilliant minds throughout history discovered. The problem isn't that you think too much. The problem is that you think in circles. You're not overthinking, you're underthinking. You're thinking the same thoughts over and over instead of thinking new thoughts that could actually solve your problems. You've been trying to cure overthinking by thinking less, but the real cure, it's thinking better, more precisely, more strategically, more consciously. And when you learn how to think differently, when you discover the specific types of thinking that create clarity instead of confusion, something extraordinary happens. Your mind doesn't become quiet, it becomes powerful. Your thoughts don't disappear, they become useful. Your mental energy doesn't diminish. It becomes focused like a laser instead of scattered like a flashlight. This isn't about positive thinking or mindfulness or any other band-aid solution. This is about fundamentally changing how your brain processes reality, about upgrading your mental operating system from chaotic to strategic, from reactive to responsive, from confused to clear. David was a software engineer at a tech startup in San Francisco. Brilliant guy, MIT graduate. Could solve complex coding problems that stumped entire teams, but David couldn't solve the problem in his own head. Every night, he'd lie in bed with his mind racing, replaying conversations from work, analyzing every word, every facial expression, every possible meaning behind every interaction. Did his boss seem disappointed in the meeting? Was his girlfriend pulling away? Should he have said something different to his coworker? Was he falling behind in his career? The questions never stopped. They just multiplied, branched out, created more questions. David tried everything. Meditation apps that told him to just observe his thoughts, breathing exercises that were supposed to calm his mind, sleep aids that knocked him out but didn't stop the spinning when he woke up. Nothing worked. Because David was treating his overthinking like a volume problem when it was actually a tuning problem. The breakthrough came during the most stressful period of his life. His startup was struggling, his relationship was rocky, and his mental health was deteriorating. He was spending so much energy thinking about his problems that he had no energy left to solve them. That's when his mentor, a successful entrepreneur who'd sold 3 companies, told him something that changed everything. "David, you don't have a thinking problem, you have a thinking structure problem." "What do you mean?" David asked. "You're brilliant at analytical thinking," his mentor explained. "You can debug code, solve algorithms, architect complex systems. But when it comes to your personal life, you're using the wrong type of thinking. You're trying to debug emotions like they're code. You're trying to solve human problems with computer logic. So what's the solution? Learn the other types of thinking. Learn when to use analytical thinking and when to use creative thinking, when to use logical thinking and when to use intuitive thinking, when to think deeply and when to think broadly." His mentor introduced him to something called metacognition, thinking about thinking. Not to stop thinking, but to think more skillfully. David learned that there are different types of thinking for different types of problems, and he'd been using the wrong tool for the job, like trying to paint a masterpiece with a screwdriver. Within weeks, David's entire mental experience shifted, not because he was thinking less, but because he was thinking differently. When he caught himself spinning in analytical loops about his relationship, he'd switched to creative thinking. What would love look like in this situation? Instead of analyzing whether his girlfriend's text message meant she was losing interest, he'd think creatively about how to add value to her day. When work stress triggered his overthinking, he'd switch to strategic thinking. What's the actual problem I need to solve here? Instead of replaying the stressful meeting 17 times, He'd think strategically about the next steps that would improve the situation. When anxiety about the future started spiraling, he'd switch to present moment thinking. What information do I have right now, and what action can I take today? Instead of catastrophizing about hypothetical scenarios, he'd focus on concrete actions he could control. The result? David's performance at work improved dramatically because his mental energy wasn't scattered across 47 different worry streams. His relationship deepened because he was present instead of constantly analyzing. His sleep improved because he'd solved the actual problems his mind was trying to solve instead of just spinning on them endlessly. But here's what surprised David most. He didn't stop thinking. If anything, he thought more. But his thinking became productive instead of destructive, helpful instead of harmful, clarifying instead of confusing. David discovered what cognitive scientists call cognitive flexibility, the ability to consciously choose different types of thinking for different situations, and it changed everything. Let's dive deep into the neuroscience of thinking, because what you're about to learn will completely change how you understand your own mind. Dr. Marcus Reichel's groundbreaking research at Washington University discovered something remarkable. When your brain isn't actively focused on a task, it doesn't rest. It switches to what neuroscientists call the default mode network, a network of brain regions that activate during rest. And here's the problem. The default mode network is where overthinking lives. When you're not consciously directing your thoughts, your brain defaults to three activities: replaying the past, usually the negative parts, worrying about the future, usually catastrophic scenarios, and self-referential thinking, usually self-critical analysis. This is why your mind races when you try to fall asleep. This is why you replay embarrassing moments from 10 years ago in the shower. This is why you can't just relax without your brain immediately jumping to your problems. Your brain's default mode is, well, overthinking mode. But here's what's fascinating. People with high cognitive flexibility, people who can consciously choose different types of thinking, show much less activity in the default mode network. They're not at the mercy of their brain's screensaver because they've learned how to consciously run different programs. Dr. Edward de Bono's research on cognitive flexibility identifies 4 distinct types of thinking that most people use randomly, but which can actually be used strategically. Analytical thinking, breaking problems down into components, examining cause and effect, logical reasoning. This is what David was overusing. It's perfect for debugging code or analyzing data, but terrible for processing emotions or making creative decisions. Creative thinking, generating new possibilities, seeing connections others miss, imagining solutions that don't exist yet. This is what most overthinkers never access because they're stuck in analytical loops. Critical thinking, evaluating ideas, spotting flaws in logic, making judgments about quality and validity. This is useful for decision-making, but destructive when applied to self-worth. Practical thinking, focusing on implementation, next steps, and concrete actions. This is what transforms thinking from mental masturbation into actual problem-solving. The breakthrough isn't learning to think less. It's learning to use the right type of thinking for each situation. The Stoics understood this 2,000 years before we had brain imaging technology. Marcus Aurelius didn't try to stop thinking. He practiced what he called the discipline of desire, the discipline of action, and the discipline of assent. Different types of thinking for different aspects of life. When dealing with external circumstances he couldn't control, he used acceptance thinking. This is what happened. What can I learn from it? When planning future actions, he used strategic thinking. What is the most rational response to this situation? When processing emotions, he used philosophical thinking. What would virtue look like in this moment? Epictetus taught that we suffer not from events themselves, but from our judgments about events. Not from thinking, but from unskillful thinking. In Eastern philosophy, they call this right mindfulness, not the absence of thought, but the presence of skillful thought. Buddha didn't achieve enlightenment by stopping thinking. He achieved it by thinking so clearly that he saw through the illusions that cause suffering. Dr. Daniel Siegel's research at UCLA shows that when people learn to consciously direct their thinking instead of being unconsciously controlled by it, several remarkable things happen. Their prefrontal cortex, the brain's CEO, becomes more active and more integrated with other brain regions. They develop what neuroscientists call cognitive control, the ability to consciously choose their mental focus. Their amygdala, the brain's alarm system, becomes less reactive. Because, when you can think skillfully about challenges, they're less likely to trigger those fight or flight responses. Most importantly, they develop executive attention, the ability to notice when their mind is spinning unproductively and consciously redirect it toward more useful thinking. This isn't about positive thinking or forcing optimism. This is about precision thinking, strategic thinking, effective thinking. The overthinking paradox. Here's what most people don't understand about overthinking. It's not actually thinking at all. It's mental cycling. It's the same thoughts on repeat, creating the illusion of mental activity while producing no actual insights or solutions. Real thinking moves you forward. Overthinking keeps you stuck. Real thinking generates new information. Overthinking rehearses old information. Real thinking leads to action. Overthinking leads to paralysis. Dr. Susan Nolan Hoxheimer's research on rumination shows that people who overthink are actually thinking less effectively than people who think strategically. They're using more mental energy to produce fewer useful insights. It's like having a sports car but only driving it in first gear. You're burning massive amounts of fuel while barely moving forward. But honestly, when you learn to shift gears, when you learn to match your thinking style to your thinking task, everything changes. The metacognitive revolution. The most successful people in any field aren't the ones who think the most. They're the ones who think the most skillfully. Jeff Bezos doesn't overthink Amazon's strategy. He uses what he calls disagree and commit thinking, gathering information quickly, making decisions with incomplete data, and committing fully to the decision while remaining open to new information. Ray Dalio, one of the world's most successful investors, practices what he calls radical transparency thinking, removing emotional attachment from analysis and looking at reality as objectively as possible. Oprah Winfrey uses what she calls intuitive thinking, combining analytical information with emotional intelligence and gut instinct to make decisions that analytical thinking alone couldn't produce. They're not thinking less, they're thinking differently, and you can learn to do the same. Let me show you the difference between the two mental worlds, between the chaotic thinking that keeps you stuck and the strategic thinking that sets you free. Your mind is like a browser with, infinite tabs open. Every thought spawns 3 more thoughts. Every worry branches into a dozen sub-worries. Every decision requires analyzing every possible outcome, consequence, and hypothetical scenario. You think about thinking, you worry about worrying, you analyze your analysis. A simple conversation with your boss becomes a 3-hour internal investigation. What did they mean when they said interesting? Was that good interesting or bad interesting? Why did they pause before responding? Are they losing confidence in you? Should you have said something different? What if they're planning to replace you? What if you're about to get fired? What if you can't find another job? What if... The questions never end because you're not actually trying to answer them. You're just asking them. Over and over. Like a broken record player stuck on the same groove. You lie in bed replaying conversations from 5 years ago, analyzing social interactions like they're complex mathematical equations, searching for hidden meanings in text messages like you're decoding ancient hieroglyphics. Your mind becomes a 24/7 detective agency investigating crimes that probably never happened, gathering evidence for cases that will never go to trial, building arguments for debates that exist only in your head. And the exhaustion is real. Mental spinning burns as much energy as physical exercise, but without any of the benefits. You end each day mentally drained from thinking thoughts that didn't improve your life, solve your problems, or move you forward in any meaningful way. Now imagine your mind as a high-performance computer with an excellent operating system. When a problem arises, you don't spin on it. You run the appropriate program. Relationship issue, you run emotional intelligence software. Career decision, you activate strategic planning mode. Creative project, you open up imaginative thinking applications. When your boss says interesting in that meeting, instead of spending, 3 hours analyzing their tone, you think strategically, what information do I need to gather to understand their perspective? What actions can I take to provide clarity? 2 minutes of strategic thinking produces a plan. You schedule a follow-up conversation. Problem solved. Mind free to work on something else. When anxiety about the future starts bubbling up, instead of catastrophizing for hours, you think practically, what aspects of this situation can I control? What actions can I take today to improve tomorrow's outcomes? 5 minutes of practical thinking produces a to-do list. Action plan created, anxiety transformed into productivity. When you catch yourself replaying past mistakes, instead of ruminating for hours, you think analytically. What can I learn from this experience? How can I apply this lesson moving forward? 10 minutes of analytical thinking produces wisdom, lesson learned, mind available for present moment engagement. The difference between these two approaches isn't just psychological, it's energetic. Chaotic thinking is, well, kind of like having a car engine that's revving constantly, but never actually driving anywhere. On the other hand, strategic thinking is like having a precision instrument that activates exactly when needed and accomplishes exactly what's required. People who think strategically have energy left over for creativity, relationships, and enjoyment because they're not burning mental fuel on unproductive thought loops. They sleep better because their mind has finished its work instead of endlessly cycling through unsolved problems. They make better decisions because their thinking is clear and purposeful instead of clouded by mental noise. And they feel more confident because they trust their ability to think through challenges effectively instead of being overwhelmed by them. But here's where it gets really interesting. The people who seem to have the most mental control aren't the ones trying to control their thoughts. They're the ones who've learned to direct them. There's a crucial difference between thought control and thought direction. Thought control is exhausting. It's trying to stop your mind from thinking certain things. It's fighting against your brain's natural processes. It's like trying to stop a river from flowing. Thought direction is effortless. It's guiding your mind toward more useful thinking. It's working with your brain's natural processes. It's like redirecting a river into a channel that serves you. The most mentally free people aren't the ones with quiet minds. They're the ones with skillfully directed minds. So how do you transform from chaotic thinking to strategic thinking? Let me give you the framework that changes everything, the think method. T. Type identification. The first step isn't changing your thinking, it's recognizing what type of thinking you're doing. Are you stuck in analytical loops, trying to solve emotional problems with logic? Are you using critical thinking to tear down ideas when you need creative thinking to build solutions? Are you applying practical thinking to philosophical questions that require different approaches? Here's a simple practice. When you notice your mind spinning, pause and ask, what type of thinking am I doing right now? And is it the right type for this situation? Most overthinking happens because we're using the wrong thinking tool for the job. It's like trying to cut down a tree with a spoon. The tool isn't broken, it's just inappropriate for the task. When your mind starts spinning with what-if scenarios, just pause for a moment and create a hypothesis. I think this situation means something specific. How can I test whether that's true? Instead of asking yourself, what if my boss is unhappy with my performance? Which honestly just leads to endless speculation. Try shifting your thinking to, I hypothesize my boss may have concerns about my current project. I can test this by scheduling a brief check-in conversation. Suddenly, you've transformed overthinking into a research project with, well, a clear next step. Information gathering. Most overthinking happens because, we're trying to solve problems with insufficient information. We're attempting to think our way to certainty when actually what we need is data. So when you catch yourself spinning on a problem, just ask, what information do I need to gather to make progress on this? If it's a relationship concern, talk to the person instead of analyzing their behavior over and over. If it's a career worry, research actual market conditions instead of, imagining worst-case scenarios. Health anxiety, consult a professional instead of consulting Google at 2 in the morning. The goal isn't to think your way to the answer, it's to think your way to the right questions, then gather information to answer them. NAN, next action focus. This is honestly the most powerful technique for stopping overthinking. Always end your thinking sessions with a concrete next action. Your brain keeps thinking because, well, it believes there's still work to do. When you identify a specific next step, your mind can finally let go of the problem because it knows what comes next. Instead of, I'm worried about my presentation tomorrow, which, let's face it, just leads to endless spinning. Try saying, I'm going to practice the opening 3 times review my key points once more, and set out my close. Then I'm done preparing. The moment you define done, your brain can stop working on the problem. The final step is turning your thinking into wisdom. Not just solving today's problem, but learning patterns that help you think more skillfully in the future. After you've worked through a challenge using strategic thinking, ask yourself, what type of thinking was most helpful for this situation? What patterns do I notice in my mental approach? How can I apply this thinking strategy to similar challenges? This builds what psychologists call metacognitive awareness, the ability to think about your thinking and continuously improve your mental processes. The 5-minute rule. When you notice overthinking starting, set a timer for 5 minutes and think as hard as you can about the problem using the appropriate thinking type. When the timer goes off, you're done. Either you've made progress or you've identified what information you need to gather. The perspective ladder. When stuck in emotional thinking, consciously climb up levels of perspective. Personal level, how does this affect me? Relational level, how does this affect my relationships? Professional level, how does this affect my work or goals? Life level, how will this matter in 5 years? Universal level, how does this fit into the bigger picture of existence? Usually, by the time you reach the life level, the problem has transformed from catastrophic to manageable. The thinking time audit. Track how much time you spend in each type of thinking for 1 week. Most overthinkers discover they spend 80% of their mental energy on analytical thinking and almost none on creative or practical thinking. Simply becoming aware of this imbalance begins to correct it. Replace overthinking questions with strategic questions. Instead of, why did this happen to me, which is victim thinking, ask, what can I learn from this? That's growth thinking. Instead of, what if everything goes wrong? That's catastrophic thinking. Ask, what's the worst realistic scenario and how would I handle it? That's preparedness thinking. Instead of, why can't I figure this out, which is self-critical thinking, ask, what type of thinking does this problem require? That's metacognitive thinking. The quality of your questions determines the quality of your thinking, and the quality of your thinking determines the quality of your life. So here we are, at the end of our journey through the landscape of human thinking. And maybe you're realizing something profound. You've been fighting the wrong battle. You've been trying to silence your mind when you should have been training it. You've been treating thinking like the problem when thinking, skillful thinking, is actually the solution. The cure for overthinking isn't less thinking, it's better thinking, more precise thinking, more conscious thinking. It's learning to use your mind like the incredible instrument it is, instead of being used by it like a victim of its chaos. Your mind is the most sophisticated thinking machine ever created. It can solve problems that supercomputers can't touch. It can create beauty that moves people to tears. It can generate insights that change the world. But, like any powerful instrument, it needs to be played skillfully. A violin in the hands of a master creates music that transcends language and touches the soul. That same violin in the hands of someone who doesn't know how to play it creates nothing but noise. Your mind is the same. In the hands of someone who understands how to think strategically, consciously, skillfully, it becomes a tool of extraordinary power and creativity. In the hands of someone who just lets it run on default mode, it becomes a source of endless suffering and confusion. The difference isn't talent, it's training. It's the conscious decision to learn how your mind works and how to work with it instead of against it. We live in an age where people spend thousands of dollars on physical fitness, but nothing on mental fitness, where they'll hire personal trainers for their bodies, but never consider training their minds. But your mind is what you use to navigate every challenge, create every solution, and build every relationship in your life. Shouldn't it be the most well-trained part of you? The most successful people in history weren't necessarily the smartest. They were the most skillful thinkers. They knew when to analyze and when to create, when to criticize and when to build, when to think deeply and when to act quickly. They understood that different problems require different types of thinking, and they developed the metacognitive awareness to choose consciously instead of defaulting unconsciously. Starting today, you can begin this transformation, not by thinking less, but by thinking better. When you catch your mind in overthinking mode, don't fight it, redirect it. Ask yourself, what type of thinking does this situation actually require? When you notice endless mental loops, don't try to stop them. Transform them. Turn questioning into hypothesis formation. Turn worrying into action planning. Turn analyzing into learning. When anxiety starts spiraling, don't try to calm down. Get strategic. Ask, what information do I need? What actions can I take? What aspects of this can I actually control? All right, here's what happens when you make this shift. Your mental energy becomes focused instead of scattered. Problems that used to keep you awake for hours get solved in minutes. Decisions that used to paralyze you become straightforward because you're using the right thinking tools. Your confidence grows because you trust your ability to think through challenges effectively. You stop being afraid of problems because you know you have the mental skills to solve them. Your relationships improve because you're present instead of constantly analyzing. Your work improves because your mental resources are directed toward creation instead of consumption. And, your sleep improves because your mind has finished its work instead of endlessly cycling. Most importantly, you become truly free. Not free from thinking, that's impossible and undesirable. Free through thinking. Free because of skillful thinking. And here's the most beautiful part of this entire journey. Once you learn to think strategically, you realize that most of your problems were never actually problems. They were just thinking problems disguised as life problems. The issue wasn't your job, your relationship, your health, or your circumstances. The issue was how you were thinking about your job, your relationship, your health, and your circumstances. When you change how you think, you change how you experience everything. Not because you're deluding yourself or practicing positive thinking, because you're finally seeing clearly instead of through the distorted lens of chaotic, unskilled thinking. So, here's your choice. You can continue trying to fix overthinking by thinking less. You can keep fighting against your mind, trying to silence it, treating it like an enemy that needs to be defeated. Or you can learn to work with your mind. You can develop the thinking skills that transform mental chaos into mental clarity. You can become someone who thinks strategically instead of reactively, consciously instead of unconsciously, skillfully instead of randomly. The first path leads to more struggle, more confusion, more exhaustion from fighting against your own brain. The second path leads to mental freedom, creative power, and the kind of clarity that makes complex problems simple and overwhelming challenges manageable. Your mind is not your enemy, it's your greatest potential ally. But like any powerful ally, it needs to be trained, directed, and used skillfully. The cure for overthinking isn't in meditation apps or breathing exercises, though those can be helpful tools. The cure is in learning to think like the strategic, conscious, powerful being you actually are. So stop trying to think less, start learning to think better. Stop fighting your mind, start training it. Stop seeing thinking as the problem, start seeing unskilled thinking as the problem you can solve. Because when you really commit to becoming a strategic thinker instead of a chaotic thinker, you'll discover something extraordinary. Your mind isn't the source of your problems, it's the solution to all of them. You just needed to learn how to use it properly. The thinking revolution starts now, not with less thinking, but with better thinking, not with a quiet mind, but with a skillful mind. And that skillful mind, it's been waiting inside you all along, ready to transform confusion into clarity, problems into possibilities, and overthinking into breakthrough thinking. The question isn't whether you can stop overthinking. The question is, are you ready to start thinking strategically? Your mind is ready when you are.